this is wild to me. I love that there's there's a whole lot of people out there who are really into horny alien books, and people are writing them.
Yes, over here.
Yeah, they're right here.
And welcome to a bonus episode of Romancing the Monsters. I'm Em.
I'm Seff.
And today, Seff and I have the honor of having a very special guest. We have Lyndall Clipstone here with us to talk about her debut novel, Lakesedge. First off, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to talk to us about your book. So, hello. Welcome to Romancing the Monsters.
Hello. Yay.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's so fun to be here. I love listening to your podcast so much, so it's very cool to be on here as a guest.
You have the behind the scenes.
I know. It's very fun to see this little peek behind the curtain after listening to it.
So this is obviously going to be an interview style episode, but if you want a more in-depth discussion of the book, Steph and I did record that. It is up on our page, so if you want to go listen to that after this episode, feel free to do so. Now, I want to quickly mention that the book, since we are recording this in the past and this is going up in the future, the book is out as this is live. The book is out. It's been out for a few days, so you can purchase it if you are in Australia, Canada, or the United States. And if I'm correct, it will be releasing in the UK in October. Is that correct?
Yeah, October the 12th it comes out in the UK and the rest of the Commonwealth with Titan Books.
Okay, so you can go and pre-order that.
Yeah.
So before we begin, just in case some of our listeners are maybe not as familiar with what Lakesedge is about, and this is no disrespect to you, Seff, because you do a fabulous job every week of telling us what the book we're reading is about. But we do have the author here with us today. So, Lyndall, would you mind quickly describing what your book is about?
Sure. So, Lakesedge is the first part of a duology. It's a young adult gothic fantasy romance, and it is about Violetta Graceling, who goes to stay at haunted Lakesedge estate with the monster of Lakesedge. And when she starts to fall in love with him and finds out he's cursed, she decides to team up with the Lord of the Dead to try and save him.
Da, da, da.
Fair warning, this episode might be a bit spoilery in terms of the questions we ask as well as the answers that we receive. So yeah, let's just get right into it. So as we were recording our episode, the discussion about the book, we kind of had some questions, some burning questions we wanted to ask you. So the first one that we have is, what is it that draws you to monsters in particular? And what was the first monster you remember loving or identifying with growing up?
So I was born in the late 80s, and I think there's just so much very formative monster romance media from the early 90s that I just totally imprinted on. Obviously Labyrinth with David Bowie is a big one. Interview with the Vampire, Bram Stoker's Dracula, all of Tim Burton's films. I think it was just, I was always a bit of a weird kid, this witchy sort of kid who loved all of the monsters and villains and things. And I remember being bitterly disappointed when I watched Disney's Beauty and the Beast turned back into a prince. I was just like,
that is the same.
That is me.
I was like, but it was so much cuter as the Beast.
Right?
And the same with wanting Sarah to stay in the labyrinth with the Goblin King, even though it is
me too.
Completely a completely inappropriate relationship, and it was narratively a sensible choice for her to leave. So I think even just as a kid where I couldn't really put a name to it, I was always very drawn to that kind of monster maiden dynamic. And then as an adult, I did an English literature degree, and one of the texts we studied was Silence of the Lambs. And
Wow.
So Starling and Lecter, like, that was just this moment where I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of
interesting.
This is the sort of dynamic that I want in, like, the romances that I write and things like that. Just the bit at the end where she's like, oh, he won't come after me because that would be rude. Like, this concept of being, like, the one who is safe from the monster is just something I've always really loved to explore.
For me, it's always something I talk about on the podcast, is that I look up fan fiction when the beast is still a beast, because I just loved Belle and his dynamic when he was a beast. They were just so cute. So speaking of the influences that you've just talked about, did any of them make it into the novel? Like, whether it was books or movies or TV shows or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely you can see, like, a lot of Labyrinth kind of vibes in there, whether they were sort of intentional or unintentional. Maybe it just kind of, like...
came out of your id.
Yeah. It just sort of came out of nowhere. Like, my subconscious kind of crept in there. But the original concept for Lakesedge was actually... what if the Secret Garden was a Gothic romance? So I grew up reading this really beautiful illustrated version of the book that our neighbor had given to me as a gift. And then there's always, like, the 90s movie. And it's just this very, like, so much potential for, like, this romantic kind of Gothic twist to the story. So there's, like, this big secretive house with all the locked up rooms, and then, like, the hurt comfort with the nightmares, and this idea of, like, finding your way out of grief through like sort of a sentient landscape kind of situation. I don't know. I think there was just something about that I always liked the idea of using as the background to, like, a romantic sort of grown-up kind of story.
And it was done so well. We talked about this in our episode, in our discussion, how it's so, like, that's what's so interesting about Gothic novels to me. It's how the environment of the characters sort of reflect what the characters are going through, like their inner turmoil and emotional journey is all, like, reflected around them, and, like, suddenly it's like almost like nature is a character, or, like, houses become characters, and it's so interesting.
It was really well done too in Lakesedge.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, setting as a character is sort of one of my favorite things, both to read and write. It's really, really fun to play with as a writer, making that sort of atmosphere happen.
So you briefly mentioned a journey with grief and stuff, and one thing we do on the podcast, which is where our name comes from, we talk about the monster of the story. So just briefly, I'll just explain for the listeners in case they're not familiar with our definition of what is a monster in a story. Obviously, we love to read about monstrous beings, but we do like to think of it as also the monsters that we all have within ourselves. In some cases, for some people, it's a fear. Sometimes it's just struggles, traumatic pasts. Anything that that the characters need to work through in order to reach their own bliss, in order to complete their character journey. So what was the monster in your book? We discussed it, but we would like to know what you think the monster in your own book was, and also how did you come about choosing that for your characters? Why was it so important for those characters to have those struggles?
I really love this question. It's always really fun to look at, like, what's the monster beyond, like, the actual physical monster. It's such a fun thing. So I think it's probably, like, self-sacrifice for me. Yeah. Like, Letta will just throw herself down in the path of danger to save everyone she loves, even though all of them are like, please don't do this. And, like, she's so protective of Arian, and it stifles him to the point where he's like, you know what, I'm gonna go with this guy who murdered his whole family and fight his, like, creepy cursed magic, because, like, I want a chance to, like, just try to live on my own and take control of my own life. And so there's this constant sort of, like, it's such a fatal flaw with her where she's kind of like, let me throw myself down in the path of danger to save you all, even though it's actually, like, she thinks it's the right thing, but it's actually kind of damaging to everyone she loves. And then Rowan is kind of the same. Like, he basically cursed himself and is being slowly destroyed. You were right.
I know, we were. Pat on the back.
Because he's like, you know, whatever, I'll be cursed, I'll be destroyed, because that's preferable to, like, you know, asking for help or having an honest conversation with somebody. You know, it's fine. And so even when he does ask for help, he does it so begrudgingly and keeps as much of the burden for himself as possible. Like, they're there trying to fix the thing in the ritual, and then he's like sneaking out at night between to like feed the tides of blood to the corruption, and he's like, don't tell anyone that I have to do this, it doesn't matter. So there's just like this sort of like this kind of Spider-Man meme of Letta and Rowan when they meet each other, and they're both like, oh, okay, this is like what, you know, my terrible like fatal flaw reflected in like another person. And this moment of connection that they have where they both sort of realize, even though their lives have been very different, that they've made these sort of terrible choices in...
I do love how similar they were, Rowan and Letta. I felt like they really mirrored each other, but they still had their differences.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like it was interesting seeing like how their very different personalities had sort of both gone in a very similar situation.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot.
And I thought that the conversation that she has with Aaron was so important when he, you know, he's her little brother, and yet he's the one who's more mature in this situation, is like, you don't realize that by sacrificing yourself like this, like, you are in a way forcing the people that you love to hurt.
Yeah.
Which is what you're trying to stop them from feeling, but you're hurting them anyways, because now we're going to have to learn to live without you, which is, you know, just as painful. So yeah. I really thought, I just loved how his perspective on the matter, because I thought it was really important for Letta to hear that, because it's like, you can throw yourself into the fire, but like, think about the people that you love, you know?
And just this sort of thing about how he's like, you never asked me if this is what I wanted, like all of these things that you've done for me, and you know, like all of this time I've had to stand back and watch you be hurt and watch you put yourself in danger, and like you never sort of stopped to think like, maybe I wanted to share some of the burden, like maybe I wanted to help you. So I really liked that scene. That was like such a nice sibling moment between them, where she kind of gets like the real talk from Arian, and he's just like, oh my god, I'm so tired of your crap. But yeah, it's really interesting actually, because I've seen like from early readers like a lot of reactions where people really dislike Letta because of how she is. Like I've got sort of reviews where they're like, she's so selfish and she makes all of these really stupid choices. And I couldn't stand reading about it because it was so unredeeming. And I'm just like, yes, exactly. Like I've done a really good job writing her if that elicits such a strong reaction from somebody, because she is flawed and she does make stupid, messy choices. And I think especially as like a 17-year-old, like it felt very important to me to show like a teen character who isn't perfect and who does make mistakes, because it's much more interesting to write, but also like I think as a reader, like isn't it more enjoyable to watch a character sort of struggle who isn't perfect?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do feel like main characters kind of sometimes suffer from I guess being too perfect. And I loved that Letta had her flaws and as well as like her strengths, and I love that both of them came into play in this book.
I love books that make me stop and think, why do I feel this way towards the character? Like, why am I angry or why am I annoyed? And usually like I have to tell myself, well, that's because they're real, you know, that's because they're complex, real characters, and
multi-dimensional.
Yes, and they act like us, and I'm sure I annoy people sometimes, you know, so you have to think about that. And I'm like, you know what, this is bold decisions from authors who are like, you know what, I'm not going to let my main character be perfect, because I'm going to let them be as real as possible.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's very cool to be able to create, like, you know, this is like something that I've just kind of made up out of words. Yeah. And she feels like a real person, like real enough to be frustrated with, and you know, wanting her to make different choices and things like that. It's like, it's kind of a little bit magical, really.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm sorry she's not perfect, but I keep thinking about
what
I was like
her.
As a 17-year-old, and maybe it's not perfect, but it's definitely very authentic.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking of Letta, actually, we wanted to ask you, one of the conversations that we had was about the fact that in your novel, Letta is a 17-year-old girl who is allowed to, you know, there's this romantic arc throughout the book, obviously. And she's allowed to feel desired and act on her own desires in your book in a really beautiful way. And I wanted to ask you about this because I do feel like in recent years, I feel like there's been like I feel like books have pulled back from showing teenage desire as if it's like a taboo thing that like, you know, teenagers shouldn't feel. But I do feel like maybe the last 2 or 3 years in publishing, like we've seen that sort of coming back, and like teenagers are once again allowed to be teenagers with desires, and it's not taboo.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than a whole bunch of like adults on Twitter arguing about like teenage sex.
Should teenagers have sex or not?
Yeah.
I remember when the last book in the Cruel Prince series came out, and there was so many people arguing about Jude and Carden having sex and how Holly Black had written it, and I'm just like, do we really need to be having this conversation? Like, it's
for the teens. Let them have their books, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so my question was, obviously you made the choice to have this be a part of Lytta's, you know, emotional journey and romantic journey. So why was that important for you, and what does it mean for you to see teenagers be teenagers on page?
I think it was really important to me to write the sort of book that I kind of wanted and needed to read as a teenager. So, I mean, I would like to think things have changed since, you know, I was a teenager, but then when you see these conversations coming up still, maybe not. Like, I think there's quite a tendency to look on, especially like teen girl desire, as sort of dirty or shameful or like a taboo. And I definitely felt that as a teenager myself, like this sort of idea of like, you know, if you had desirous feelings, it was like sort of, you know, slutty, or it wasn't okay. And so I wanted to write the type of romance that like I sort of would have loved to see modeled much more as a young person, where it was sort of very sensually lush and romantic and unapologetically intense, desirous, but but in like in an age appropriate kind of way as well. Like I think there's this real sort of like tenderness to it, of her kind of having this moment of being allowed to like be loved and want something and sort of lean into those feelings. And I think it could be very like, it's very empowering for her, but perhaps would also be empowering for readers too. So so that was why it was very important to me to model like the sort of the moments of like very sexy consent, like in the romance scene where he's like, they're sort of very like
asking each other
verbal.
That was so important. And I loved that moment in the book.
Very verbal sort of consent, and like the discussion of contraception and things like that. So She's like, I've got tea, you can drink it. She's just like, oh, okay, cool.
The famous tea.
I feel like it's something that should be talked about. And I feel like having it and seeing it in books and in stories and things like that, it kind of makes it more, I guess, something that you can talk about, because you do see it and it is happening on page. And I love that. I think teenagers of today, they need to know it's not shameful.
And like I think I would have really appreciated as a teen just seeing in media or having someone sort of take me aside and say, this is not something that you need to be ashamed of. This is like a normal like feeling, part of being human. I mean, not everybody has romantic feelings, obviously, but it's like if you do, it's okay. And so I think like the fact that Lytta is just so unashamedly horny for all of the monsters is just like such an inspiration. But
can relate.
I can relate. She's just like, she's sort of, I mean, and it was a nice part of her arc as well. Like it's sort of, there was this is sort of like in general, like being at Lakesedge is kind of like the first time that she gets to claim anything for herself.
Yes,
she's
exactly.
got like a bedroom and new clothes and books and this kind of life where she doesn't have to be like afraid in the way she has been before. And I think like the desire for Rowan is kind of another part of that. It's like this moment where she's like, oh, like I want to be with this other person, and maybe it's okay for me to actually do that.
And also, like, the world is kind of falling apart around her. And so she's kind of taking a moment and being like, you know what? I deserve this moment of peace I want, you know? And yeah, that's great. We're kind of edging a subject, which is Lord Under.
We haven't even talked about him yet. How could we?
So, speaking of being horny for monsters, Seff and I, we feel like there were Hades and Persephone vibes to this book, specifically the relationship between Lord Under and Letta. We did notice the pomegranates. We noticed that. We noticed Letta's affinity for, growing plants. So we just wanted to know, was this intentional?
Put us out of our misery.
Are we reading too much into this?
It was definitely intentional. Like, I have just always loved the myth of Hades and Persephone since I first heard it. I remember, like, my school librarian telling it to us when I was a kid, and, like, again, like, with watching all of the Labyrinth and things like that, I just had this moment of, like, that I couldn't really name. It was just something that appealed to me. And so I think in writing those scenes, I just decided to let myself be completely indulgent when writing the Hades and Persephone thing, like, like the pomegranate tree and the calling to the underworld and things like that. And actually the gardening part was actually not really intentional. Like, that wasn't meant to be sort of like a Corey reference. It was more that my dad growing up was actually a really, really good horticulturalist. And so all of the seeds from Letta, where she's sort of channeling like her dad growing flowers with magic, is kind of based on that. So I grew up in this house where there was always like bags of seeds everywhere and trays of cuttings growing, because he would go out and like collect sort of seeds and cuttings from rare native plants to try and propagate them. And he definitely set me up for like very like high expectations, because I am like not a good gardener at all. I'm just like, what do you mean you can't just like break a piece of plant off and stick it in the ground and then like it grows into a tree? Because that's how it looked when you did it. So it was a lot of fun being able to put that into the book, and have like turn it sort of into like real magic, I guess. So I think unintentionally she became this kind of like force of nature because of that.
As much as I would love to be Persephone, I will literally kill anything that's green.
Oh my gosh, same. I cannot.
I'm really good at growing indoor plants like devil's ivy and things like that. The ones where you can just like put them in a jar of water and grow them.
I would probably kill that too.
No, mine die. Mine die miserably and quickly. They do. So sorry. Speaking of your dad, was that kind of like an inspiration behind the Death Realm being a forest, or was there any specific intent or message behind it? It was so interesting to us because I'm someone that kind of only sees like a different side of the underworld, like the traditional, or like what you would think the underworld would look like. You see that on media, and you read that in books. So like, was there any thought behind portraying it as a death? Like, as a forest?
I wanted it to feel a bit like a negative image of the world above and of the estate. So Lakesedge has got this very like lush, sort of vibrant summer garden, and then when she slips through to the world below, it's kind of dark and misty and gloomy. So it's this like opposite kind of feel to the like what she's used to. And I think that plays out a lot more in Forestfall as well, where she spends a lot more time in the world below and notices the differences between the two. Yeah, you definitely get to see more of the world below in book 2, which is, it's been a lot of fun to write. So
we did notice that the world under was suddenly changing for her.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
To be continued.
To be continued. I mean, that's the thing. The Lord Under does promise to mend her and send her home, but he, even though he can't lie, he's very good at not like, twisting words to fit. Yeah. So I feel like she's going to be kind of annoyed when she figures out what he's actually done.
Uh-oh.
It's going to be good. I can't wait for everyone to read it. But yeah, so it's just, I like the idea of it being like this negative image of like the garden that she grew herself, and also this idea of it feeling kind of enclosed, like this sort of very separated world, like there's no sky, and the whole like world as far as you can see is just trees, and yeah, so it's like, even though it's quite this big open forest, it still feels quite like claustrophobic in a way.
Yeah. Seff?
Oh. No, I also had this really this question that I don't know if you can answer. It might just be spoilery for the next book, or it might just be something that you could answer, maybe not. Anyways, so is there any way you can shed some light on this three-way connection happening between Lord Under, Letta, and Rowan? Because as we were reading it and discussing it, we kind of were intrigued by it because of, like, Letta has a connection with Rowan because of the sigils on their arm, and then she also has a strange connection with Lord Under, but, like, somehow in the end it kind of seems like, is there a connection with all of them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to spoil anything for book 2, but I will say they have a kind of love triangle without it being a love triangle. So I didn't want it to be like, oh no, she's torn between two boyfriends and everyone's jealous, and you know, but she does have an emotional connection to both of them, and be like, as well as like the magical kind of connection too, where she's tied to Rowan with the sigil. She's tied to the Lord Under because she's the only one who can see and summon him.
And touch him.
They're also kind of like, and touch him. Yes!
Important details.
It's like, oh, we can touch each other now. And she's just like, okay, this is way more than
And he was like intrigued. Yeah, I was excited about that.
So, I mean, and the touching thing as well, like she's has the ability to kind of be alive in the world of the dead, which is sort of unique to her. So she does have this kind of connection that makes her special / perhaps useful to him in his eyes. But yeah, she's like, and they're also tied to like these formative emotional moments in her life. You know, like he's the monster that led her out of the woods as a child, and then Rowan's her first love. So I think they're all kind of very bound up together. But Rowan too, kind of, he's quite inextricably bound to the Lord Under, and perhaps a different way. I mean, he's sort of
okay.
His whole life's been shaped by the fact that the Lord Under saved him, and then like when he broke his promise, that, you know, like the punishment that kind of got meted out because of it. And like he literally has part of the Lord Under's magic inside of him because of the corruption. So it's this kind of thing of like, you know, like the three of them were kind of very tangled up together in a way that like perhaps can never be untied. So I guess watch this space and see how it turns out. But if anyone wants to write OT3 fanfic, you 100% have my permission.
I will say that, embarrassingly enough, for a while when I was reading, I was so torn between Rowan and Lord Under that I was like, is it possible that somehow they're the same person? So I don't have to choose.
That would be really fun. Like, that would be a fun thing to play with. But no, they're just like very kind of, it's kind of like a weird, messy, tangled up. It will be a lot of fun to write and figure out in book 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm excited to see how that develops further in book 2. But speaking of Rowan's connection with Lord Under, Letta and him kind of have the same experiences where like they almost died, but then they got saved by Lord Under. Is there a reason why Rowan cannot do the same thing that Letta does, which is like speak to him, summon him, and even obviously touch him? Is there a reason why, or is that maybe something explored in book 2?
So the Lord Under does sort of explain it to Letta when she summons him in the parlor the first time, and she sort of says to him like, why didn't you come back for me? Like, why haven't you gone to Rowan to like sort this out? And it's kind of like a bit of like chaos magic sort of thing where whenever the Lord Under encounters someone, it leaves behind a mark. So like for Arian, it was his dark alchemy, and then later like when he saves Arian from the ritual, how he gets the wounds on his arms. And then for Rowan, it was the water of the lake turning black when he came back to life. And then for Letta, it was this ongoing connection that was always sort of there between them. And then when she came to Lakesedge, because of the corruption and everything being there, it was like that kind of reawakened. like the Lord Under doesn't really have any control over what outcome his like touch on people's lives will have. It's just like kind of the price of, you know, coming close to death and going back because you've kind of broken the balance of the world. So his bond to Letta is kind of like a surprise to them both, and not something that he expected to have with anyone. And so when he realizes that it's there, like it's at first he's just kind of sort of seeing it as something that could be useful to him, but then as it goes along, like, yeah, I mean, obviously you know, it's kind of plot convenient, but sometimes you just need to go with these things to make
I
them
love
happen.
it.
But yeah, I mean, like, and Rowan sort of talks about it a little bit about how, like, you know, he tried, like, he only sort of spoke to the Lord Under once. No one else has ever been able to see him either, like, see his face. And that's sort of, there's that moment where Letta sort of sees what he truly looks like, with like the sort of fractured eyes and mouths and everything.
Yes.
And then he kind of settles into like her brain making sense of like a shape, putting like a face on this impossible creature. So like Rowan's never been able to see him, and like he's only sort of heard his voice a couple of times. And then when he realized that he wanted to redo the bargain, he sort of says to her, like, I tried to call him back, like I tried to summon him, and then in doing that he kind of just made the corruption. So it's not really like a cut and dry kind of strict rules sort of things. I don't know, it felt appropriate to have this kind of like wild chaotic magic, seeing as it's dealing with like death and life and everything. And yeah,
speaking of getting close enough to death to touch it, a book that we absolutely adore on this podcast, and I think that you love it as well, is Keturah and Lord Death by Martine Leavitt. We actually have a whole episode on it in which we mostly just fangirl. But
about Lord Death.
How can you not, though? He is just the best.
So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the appeal of characters that are like the personification of death, sort of like your Lord Under or Lord Death? What do you think is so attractive about them? There's like a, I don't even know. There's like a, you just feel pulled towards them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just something really powerful in making death, which is like in real life, like a very scary and unavoidable thing, into this force that can kind of be interacted with, and especially like personifying it as a figure of romance. It's kind of like a way of seizing control, perhaps, like seizing control of fear, of mortality. I don't know.
Yeah.
And like I said before, I've always been kind of drawn to this idea of like the one the monster won't hurt, or the one who's safe from the monster. And maybe it's like if you're the one who death loves, or who can fall in love with death, it's like this way of like escaping mortality or escaping the inevitability of death. Not to say, like, I really liked how they handled it in Keturah and Lord Death, because when she does choose to go with him, it's quite bittersweet. Like, she's sort of she's giving up, like, oh, I'm giving up the children that I'll never have, and like, you know, like my life with you is not going to be like the human life that I'd always sort of imagined. And so I like that, how there was still sort of a sacrifice in the becoming, like the immortality of becoming Death's bride or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really powerful way to look at something that's frightening and kind of take control of it.
I love that. Taking control of death.
Death is like the one thing that controls everything in a way. Like, death has control over life. So if you have control over death, then you're pretty much on top of the world.
Yeah, and I think it's really fascinating to me how things have changed. Like when you look back at like, especially like Victorian era sort of mourning culture, how death was like kind of glorified in a way, or not glorified, but you know, like there was a reverence to it. And now it's sort of like everybody kind of, it's not quite the same sort of feeling. It's something that's kind of feared and not spoken of. And maybe there's like something in that idea of like embracing death, turning it into something that you can love or humanize in a way like that sort of makes it less frightening, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, in fiction, like I definitely like get a lot of existential terror in real life, thinking about, you know, like I've got children and sometimes they're like, what's going to happen when you die? And I'm just like, oh, please don't ask me that. I don't know.
I'll just create it.
It's like, in a book is fine. That's good.
Yeah.
So speaking of things that, you know, books, TV shows, etc., that we love, there's, you know, a recurring series that we have on the podcast, which we called Catch Up and Chill. In it, we kind of discuss the books that, or TV shows or movies that we're really loving at the moment, or that we loved. So, you know, we were just wondering, do you have things that you would like to share with us and our listeners that you think they would love?
I've been listening to and watching like a very eclectic mix of things at the moment. So I'm currently, like, as we're recording this, like a week out from my Australian pub release date, and about a month out from Lakesedge coming out. and I'm on deadline for Forestfall, so I'm just very like kind of vibrating on this like level of stress. So I've been binge watching The Golden Girls because there's just something very
love that show.
soothing and nostalgic about this show. Like I never watched it as like when it was on TV when I was a kid, but I always sort of saw it around, and it's just kind of like there's something about it. It kind of reminds me of my grandma, and like I don't know, it's very soothing. So I've been watching that like in the background while I'm cleaning the house or doing other things. But probably like a more fun recommendation would be I'm about a third of the way through For the Wolf by Hannah Witten, which
oh, that's on my list.
Is so good. I was really lucky enough to read like a very early version of it like a while ago when Hannah and I swapped books, but it's just like one of those stories where I feel like it was just written exactly for me, which I'm sure like there's probably like a million people out there who feel the same, but it's just
probably every Reylo on Earth.
Every Reylo
on Earth. There's even like this very like Reylo moment in there where she sort of does something in the past, and like they have this like she's like, wait, I saw you in the past when I did this thing, and I'm just like, oh yes, the Reylo vibes, perfect.
Your book also has some Reylo moments too. I didn't miss them.
Yeah, I kind of said like the Reylo moments for me, I think again it was probably like this sort of subconscious thing when I was drafting it. Like I think I'd seen the first movie at least before I wrote Lakesedge, and then I think while I was revising it I kind of went deep into like a Reylo moment and was watching the films and reading like a ton of fanfic, and just really like I had a lot of feelings about how it ended, and so I think I kind of needed to like soothe myself a bit. And so especially when I was writing Forestfall, I think I was kind of like, this is my like Reylo revisionist ending.
Your revenge.
Yes. A redemption arc for the Rise of Skywalker.
How I would have liked it to sort of like end
Pan
a
out.
bit differently. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll just try and channel that into how I'm wanting to write it. But yeah, For the Wolf is just, I'm sort of trying to take it slowly and savor every moment because it's just so perfect and just exactly the sort of book that I'm always seeking out when I go to read things. It's like beautifully written and so romantic, and the dynamic between Red and Eamon is just so perfect. And
oh my gosh, that makes me more excited to read that.
Yeah, we need to try and read it for the podcast for sure.
Yeah, I think you will really enjoy it. It makes me really happy to see like a very romance heavy book doing so well. Like it's just really lovely seeing these sort of like romantic fantasy stories becoming like widely read and widely embraced, because I think it is something that people want, and I think there's definitely a tendency for people to be dismissive over romantic books. Like even one of my trade reviews was something like, oh well, like fans of romance will probably overlook like the fact that it's predictable, and I'm like, listen, all right, romance is good.
Romance is so good.
Sorry that I'm not writing like War and Peace over here, but you know, like romance is perfect. And I read so much just like regular romance as well, but sometimes there's just this really lovely like the blend of like a full like plotted out fantasy world with like the heavy romance. It's just absolutely perfect.
It's so good. Who is one of your go-to authors, like romance authors?
I love Tessa Dare.
Oh, I love her too.
Yeah, she's my favorite. I think I probably read almost everything of hers. I really love the Spindle Cove series, and Goddess of the Hunt was the first book that I read by her, which is that's not Spindle Cove, but it's like a fake dating. So she's got a crush on like this guy's friend, and to make him jealous, she's like, if we could like, you could teach me how to seduce him to like, so he'll marry me. And then obviously like they fall in love with each other.
I know, I love that trope too, and I don't think I've read that one. So I guess I might have another book to read.
There's 3 of them. Yeah, so there's Goddess of the Hunt, and then the second one is like the best friend of the girl in the first book, and she runs away and goes on like a pirate ship, or like it's not a pirate ship, but like kind of that sort of vibe, pretending that she's a governess because she's running away from like a marriage she doesn't want.
Oh.
And so that's a lot of fun. And it's got the like, so the guy who's like captaining the ship used to be like a profiteer or something, but he and his brother have decided to go legit, and his brother's like, you cannot seduce the governess when we're on our first legit voyage. So he's got this trope of he's like, I can't touch her. Ooh. And so there's like simmering tension of like, no, I've promised that I won't touch you. Oh, so good.
You're selling us these books right now.
I know. This happens on every Catch Up and Chill. I just end up adding all the books, and I always say I'm going to read it. That's going to be my next read. So I feel like I'm going to say it again, and these are going to be my next reads.
Tessa is just, she does, like, with her romance, it's very, like, the sort of romance that I sort of like to write to. It's very female-centered and, like, unapologetically desirous. And I think a lot of the time when you read historical romance, especially ones that are not written so recently, it can be very... like there's like the way that the female desire is written about is kind of, it's a little bit icky sometimes. So it's really refreshing to see like historical romance written with like a very modern sensibility. And for contemporary, I really, really love Sierra Simone. So like the Thorn Chapel series.
Interesting.
So good. It's like this, I mean, I would probably look up like the content warnings for it because it just, it's really... It's really weird. It's like the weirdest book, but it's so good. It's kind of like a romance novel crossed with like dark academia, crossed with like, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey, but like not bad. And it's like, just, I don't know. It's like nothing I've ever read, but it's so beautifully written and it's so weird and just, it's excellent. I've got the very last book as an ebook to read and I'm looking forward to finding out what happens to everybody at the end of it now.
Very taboo. Her romances are very taboo.
Yeah, I've started reading the Priest series too, and that's like kind of, it's just, I like it though, but it's, I think sometimes when you're writing in YA, you have to be like understandably very aware of like the sort of rules about what boundaries you can and can't push. I have a lot of feelings about when people want to get sort of moralistic about what is acceptable and unacceptable to write in YA because like, there's like a very wide range of experiences that teens have, and I think it's good for them to have healthy models of that, even if it is kind of like messy. But in terms of like writing a romance or writing like a dynamic, even between Letter and The Lord Under, I have to be very aware of like keeping a balance where it wasn't getting too iffy. But reading something like Sierra Simone is like, it's very enjoyable for me as like an adult reader where I can go, okay, like, this is totally transgressive, but it's okay because this is like a kind of book where the rules don't need to apply. So
exactly.
Yeah. So it's a nice escapism.
That's something I love as a romance reader. Like, I mean, I have hard limits as every romance reader does, I think, but I always find that super comforting to just know that like, no matter who you are, there's romance books out there for you.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. Like the whole, like I went sort of down this rabbit hole and read the like Drax series where it's like green alien sort of things, and I'm just like,
we love
and I'm just like, this is wild to me. I love that there's like, there's a whole lot of people out there who are really into like horny alien books, and people are writing them.
Yes, over here.
Yeah,
they're right here.
They're really, if you haven't read them, they're really good. There's like, I think there's a Rule and Rain, and I can't remember the third one, but it's kind of like, Earth has been like taken over by aliens and like they helped rescue them or something, and so now they have this kind of program where you can go and like live on the alien planet to like either be like a breeding person or be like a servant, like a nanny. And then in the first book, like she's going to be a nanny, but she accidentally gets switched around with like the promised human who was meant to marry the king.
Oh my gosh.
And it's
who's
like,
the author?
Oh gosh, now I can't remember. Hang on, let me look it up.
Okay. This is like right up my alley.
We need the name.
It's called the Drax series. So DRAAX, and it's by Elizabeth Kelly.
I'm gonna add that to my list right now.
So there's Reign, Rule, and Rebel, and also like the kind of like the trope is that like they like to share partners as like a social thing. So it'll be so it's like you get like your green alien boyfriend and then like his friend who is like that's
the blue alien and then the red alien as well.
They're all green. And they have tails. So
I love tails. I'm really bad.
I love it. Everyone comes here to like hear about my gothic romance, and I'm just like, horny aliens, but
it's fine. It's the right place to do that.
Exactly. But yeah, I don't know. It's fun. I love reading all of those sort of like weird kind of romances. Like historical romances are probably my favorite because just the aesthetics are really, like the beautiful dresses and things like that. But sometimes it's really fun to read something that's just completely out there. So,
but also all the rules in historical romance. You can't do this, you can't touch that.
Yeah, I like that a lot about Bridgerton, like the whole sort of, when you get to touch somebody's hand without a glove on it or something, it's just...
Or like when the ankle makes an appearance.
Yes.
Ankles are shocking.
Or like, oh no, like we've spent the night alone, like I'm going to be compromised even though nothing happened. Yeah, it's just, it's a really fun way to sustain tension, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. And are you a Lisa Claypass fan?
I don't think I've actually read anything by her. I know the name, but... Or maybe I have. I'm trying to think. I think there might have been one... Was there one where it was like... She was meant to marry the guy's father, but then she ended up marrying him instead?
No, that's, I think, Lorraine Heath.
Okay. No, I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
Like, I think I've seen the covers of her books amongst, like, other... So I'll have to add that to the list, though. I've heard the name.
Yeah, we love them over here on Romancing the Monsters.
We are strong Lisa Claypass fans and stans.
We're stans.
Yeah,
okay.
we're stans.
I will have to look it up. What's her best series, do you think? Oh, she does like the Wallflower books.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I've had lots of people recommend them.
I would start with the Wallflowers.
You have to read them in order, though, and you have to start with Again the Magic.
Yes, Again the
Those
Magic.
Those are the rules.
I just Googled it, and like the first thing that popped up is like, what order should I read the Lisa Claypass books? Okay.
Well, their order is wrong. Mine is right.
Okay. Again, the Magic. Definitely. All right. I'll add that to the list. I feel like once I turn in my deadline, I'm going to have the best time just reading everything because it's so hard to focus on anything else apart from editing when I'm doing revisions. But it's so nice in between. And I'm just like, yes, I can finally catch up on all of the romance novels and everything else.
Well, speaking of your sequel, Forestfall, we know we can't fish for too much information and we're going to try to fish anyway. But if you can, what are some tropes that we can expect in the second book?
Yes.
Okay, let me think. So you get to find out the Lord Under's true name, which is really fun. So there's
love
like
that.
a bit of like a fairy like name trope situation happening. There's like lots of Reylo Force Bond vibes.
Nice.
Kind of maybe some like Darkling Alina sort of magic kind of situation.
Okay,
excuse me. Can we have it now?
So the book is coming out tomorrow?
I think I remember reading the Grisha trilogy when I was still, before I queried Lakesedge, and I was just like, ooh, and then like I think I did a revision and like the person who was reading it for me was like, this feels very much like the Darkling, maybe you just need to take a little bit of distance. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I just have a lot of feelings, okay?
Yeah.
So the whole like Darkling and Alina doing the magic together is very, I'm into it. And like that scene in like Shadow and Bone where he puts the collar like in her skin. Look, I know that I'm not supposed to find that hot, but you know.
But
Me
we
too.
all do.
Me too.
Like I know it's like a terrible moment for her, but also like I would totally let Ben Barnes put a weird collar in my skin. It's okay.
I would let him put anything on me.
Yeah. Also, they made it way creepier in the show. In the books,
I know.
wasn't
Yeah,
nearly
in the
as
books
creepy.
it wasn't. I really loved how creepy it was in the show.
Yeah.
Like, not just from like a romantic point of view, but just it was really cool how they pushed it. I think it was very effective.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are little bit tidbits, but I love them. If you can, what are 3 words you would use to describe the second book?
Reylo, Darklina, and
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's definitely got like a very like Darklina, Reylo.
I shouldn't have said that. We would have gotten different words.
So there's like this fan art of Star Wars, or maybe it's not even fan art. It was like from like the art book, and it's got like Dark Rey sitting on the throne at the end.
Yes.
With, like, so that is kind of the vibe. So it's like this very like Dark Rey kind of vibe, I think.
I am ready. Those were more than 3 words, but I am ready.
Do we need to ask the last question, Seff? Because this is painful, actually.
I know. I just realized we're gonna have to wait until next year, but it's okay. I mean,
It's so
I'm
funny.
excited.
It is wild to be writing a book like and
Years
it's
in
like
advance,
yeah, like over a year before it comes out. It's really strange.
It's exciting. Okay, last question about the sequel, I promise. on a scale of 1 to 10, how much monster loving is there going to be in the sequel?
Like, oh, I don't even know. Maybe, like, I guess if Lakesedge was like a 5, then Forestfall's probably like an 8 out of 10.
Ooh.
That was when my editor first read it, and she's just like, you made it even more romantic than the first one. So yes, I kind of just like it was this sort of, if I had to write a sequel, I was going to just put everything in it that I wanted. So there's lots of like kissing and romantic scenes, and it's just, yes, very fun.
Love that.
I'm so excited.
Right. So we want to end this with rapid fire questions, just to try and see what's in your subconscious. So you have to answer real quick.
Okay.
And I'll be taking notes. No, I'm kidding. I promise.
We will be, Seff and I will be analyzing your answers and trying to come up with the plot of book 2.
I think I've made it clear that my like subconscious is just like David Bowie and the Labyrinth, basically.
All right. So are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Ben Solo or Kylo Ren?
Ben Solo.
Bloodthirsty but misunderstood vampire or dark wizard lord?
Vampire.
Interesting. Dark side or light side?
Dark side.
Hades or Persephone?
Hades.
A dramatic cape or a beautiful bejeweled crown?
I think a cape.
The Phantom or the Goblin King?
The Goblin King. But that is a very hard decision.
Yeah, that one's hard.
Winter solstice or summer solstice?
Summer solstice.
Interesting. Haunted mansion or creepy lake?
Haunted mansion.
A secret ritual under the full moon or a romantic escapade at dusk?
Secret ritual.
Fangs or claws?
Claws.
Epic redemption arc or villain origin story?
I like redemption arc. I think villain origin stories sometimes spoil like the villainness.
Or sometimes it's just really tragic too.
Yeah, I liked Cruella. That was a good villain story, origin story.
That was a good one.
Heathcliff or Rochester?
Maybe Rochester, just by the tiniest bit.
Okay.
Reincarnated lovers or immortal lovers?
I'm going to say immortal lovers because I've been playing Witcher 3 and I'm very into like Geralt and Yennefer, even though they're not immortal, but they live for a long time, and their dynamic is very fun.
Potion of youth or potion of love?
Potion of love.
Lost at sea or lost in the woods?
Lost in the woods.
I feel like that makes sense.
Yeah. I actually really, really don't like the ocean and deep water, which was like funny because I chose to write a book about
live in
like,
Australia.
creepy water.
Terrifying. So.
Yeah.
Slow burn with eventual smut or arranged marriage between enemies?
Ooh, arranged marriage between enemies because the tension there is just perfect.
Insta love or insta lust?
Insta lust.
And lastly, happy ever after or happy for now?
I'm going to go with happy ever after.
Yeah. We have to.
We have to.
And last one, Lord Under or Rowan? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I can't choose between the two. I both of them. If I can't pick. It's like my covers. Everybody's like, which cover do you like best? I'm like, I really like them all. I don't actually have a favorite. So the same. Like I think probably like Rowan is like a better boyfriend because he actually tries to be a good person. But like
Yeah.
But Lord Under's like he has his charm.
Yeah. I love your covers, by the way.
Yes.
They're so beautiful. All of them.
All right. Well, I mean, we won't keep you for longer because we know you have a very, very busy schedule right now. So thank you so much again for joining us and discussing your book and all the things that you love, including Reylo and Hades and Persephone.
And Lord Death.
Absolutely.
The best things.
Yeah. So before we go, do you want to quickly tell people where they can buy your book so that they can go out there and view it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically available. I guess by the time this comes out, it will be available everywhere. And
yes,
obviously support your local indies
Yes.
is the best. Books and Books in Florida have been hosting my pre-order campaign, and I will be having my launch with them, or will have had my launch with them by the time this comes out. So they are definitely lovely. But there's so many wonderful bookstores in the US. That's very exciting. So yeah, it's available probably hopefully wherever you can get books, or at libraries.
Do you want to also maybe tell people where they can find you online?
Where they can find me? I'm mostly on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is LK Clipstone, and I have a website which is just lyndallclipstone.com. So between the two of those, I think is usually where I post the most updates.
Well, I mean, we wish you all the best with this release. It is your debut after all. So.
I know. I can't believe it's finally here. It just feels like I've been it's been coming up forever, and now it's like, oh, okay. I'm so excited, and it's both terrifying and amazing to put this book out into the world where it'll now belong to all of the readers rather than just to me.
Well, we loved your book over here at Romancing the Monster, so it was such an honor to talk to you and pick your brain about book 2 and also about this book and just fangirl with you.
It was lovely. It was so fun talking with you. Thank you for having me.
And just a reminder, Seff and I did discuss this book at length in a different episode, so if you want to go check that out, it is up there. If you want to find us online, we are on Twitter at the RTM Pod, as well as on Instagram at Romancing the Monsters Podcast. You can also email us if you want to at romancingthemonsterspodcast@gmail.com. And we're on TikTok, though not very active, Seff.
Hello, I have an amazing Lisa Claypass one I think I posted it a long time ago, actually, from this. So yes, I will be more active by then.
I have such respect for you. I've tried so hard with TikTok, and like there's this kind of thing where everybody's like, oh, Adam Silvera got really big on TikTok. I'm like, he was already big. You don't need to make a TikTok to be famous as an author. Like, at least I hope not, because it just makes me feel like the mom from Mean Girls when I'm just like,
doing the dances.
I'm cool. Yeah, they're dancing along with them. I'm just like, I made a couple of videos so I'd have something on there, but I'm just like, no, I can't.
No, it's hard sometimes to like make those videos and edit them and like make sure they look good. But yeah, I'll get on that, Mark.
Yeah, it's like I have so much like respect for people who can do like the amazing sort of really clever or funny ones. It's just I've made a few and they are a lot of work. It's fun, but yeah, I don't think I could do like a huge amount.
Yeah, you definitely will not find dances on our TikTok. That's for sure. But if you do want to find it, it's Romancing the Monsters Pod. And if you want to find me specifically, I'm on both Twitter and Instagram at Foes and Lovers.
And I'm also on both Instagram and Twitter at Pros with Woes.
And that's it. We'll see you next week, guys. Bye.
Bye.